Hello everybody and welcome to One Piece chapter 1022, Wings of a Pirate King. I feel like that's what this chapter should have been called, because it brings back what Robin said back in 1020. And so this chapter makes it obvious who the other wing is. The cover shows the Tontara playing hide and seek with a frog in some hydrangea. Conceptually, I think this is one of the weakest covers that we've had in a while, but I do think it's a reference to the fact that these flowers are very popular in Japan. They even have these gardens for them. I also learned that they bloom during the rainy season, so it's very common to see frogs hanging out in them. We then get a reminder of how this whole thing started, with the Alliance having 5,400 men, and then the Beast Pirates having 30,000 men. We get a bird's eye view of the location of the defeated Topiropo, and we also get to see the tower that Zoro sliced up when he first arrived. We see Sasaki, Who's Who, and Black Maria. They're all wide-eyed. And I find it interesting that we don't get a shot of Ulti in page 1. However, I do remember Ulti being wide-eyed. The only one I don't remember is page 1 because he was kind of stuck in the floor, quivering after Big Mom hit him. So we didn't get to see his eyes. And so the question here is, are we buying this? Are they really actually down? Because you look at Who's Who, and you see that his mask is beginning to crack. So we still need to see his face. CP0 needs to see his face to identify him. And then we also never found out what that eye tattoo that he had was about. So that's still some unresolved mystery behind Who's Who. Turns out that Onigashima will be landing on the Flower Capital in 15 minutes. Luffy already looks like he's had enough to eat, so he just needs to shrink down. Momonosuke is noticeably absent from this panel, so I'm wondering if his transformation is going to be happening off screen, or if we're actually going to see the transformation take place coming up shortly. We go back to the castle for a Ninja Showdown. Raizo uses Shadow Clone Jutsu, and then Fukurokuju uses his cracking earlobes to attack. And so that reminded me a lot of Kumadori's life return technique. The way he explained it was that if you extend your consciousness towards different parts of your body, you can pretty much control any part of it. So in his case, he controls his hair. And we get a pretty good contrast there between Fukurokuju's motivation and Raizo's motivation, where Fukurokuju states that the Oniwabanshu's duty is to serve the Shogun of Wano. So it's kind of like a contractual obligation, whereas Raizo is more feeling oriented. And so he gets emotional and yells, and that gives up his location, because the other clones don't yell or get emotional. And so Fukurokuju slaps the real one in the face, and then Raizo's like, the Scabbards and I aren't like you. We're not here because of some contract. We're here because we actually cared deeply about the person that we served under. Except for Kanjiro. That guy turned out to be a rat. And I feel like regardless of whether Fukurokuju's mentality is right or wrong, he's gonna end up serving Momonosuke anyway, because, like he said, the Oniwabanshu always serves the Shogun, and we know that Momonosuke will become the Shogun by the end of the arc. So with that same logic, Fukurokuju is destined to serve Momonosuke because of that contractual obligation.
The ghost theme also gets brought up again in this fight, by Raizo saying that the Scabbards kind of feel like ghosts, and then Fukurokuju sort of accusing Raizo of serving a ghost. So it's just crazy how many thematic references there's been to the afterlife in this arc. Just last chapter, we had the Devil Child, right? And we had Brooke saying that, the ladies he was about to fight were like ghouls. We also had a pug looking like a Wanyudo. The Wanyudo's purpose is to bring people into the underworld. We also have Denjiro, who got possessed by a spirit, and his entire appearance changed because of it. Which, by the way, I happen to think that the reason for why he got possessed was also in part so that Zoro wouldn't recognize him, because he does look a lot like his old master. So I feel like once he gets free of that anger, he'll go back to normal, and then Zoro will kind of say like, oh, you look like my old master. And then we'll get an explanation as to how Denjiro and Koshiro are actually related. Speaking of Zoro, Zoro wants to be taken to Ryuma's grave by the end of the arc. So that's another reference. We also had Oden coming back via Kanjiro's ability. And then, this entire island, Onigashima, we're headed to a fire festival. And the purpose of the fire festival is to honor the dead. It's to sort of connect the living with the dead. And if Tenguyama Hitetsu ends up being Oden's father, then it's kind of like him coming back from the dead. Because, the people of Wano assume or think that he's dead. So yeah, there's too many references to the afterlife and ghosts. There's also that moment where Ace tells Yamato that he would like to have a drink with Roger at some point. So something has to come out of that ghost theme. It's just way too prevalent throughout this entire arc for it to be ignored by the end. We get an individual panel for each of the scabbards as Raizo is talking, and look, if I'm being completely honest, like, if I were writing One Piece, I would have killed several scabbards, like, some time ago, you know? In fact, I probably would have killed a scabbard, like, I legit would have killed a scabbard before the Alliance even got to Onigashima. I probably would have killed a scabbard like during Act 1 of Wano, just to raise the stakes a little bit. Anyway, there's also a theme that gets repeated throughout this chapter, which is the theme regarding the relationship between a leader and his subordinates. So for example, we have Killer worrying about hurting Kid, so that's that leader-subordinate relationship that they have. Then we have Raizo mentioning Odin. And I'm just going to read it to you because I'm going to make this connection between what Raizo says in this chapter and what we've heard Marco say in a previous chapter. So Raizo says, "It was not Odin's order to us, not a mere duty. Each of us chose to follow our emotions and carry out this mission out of our own free will." And then if we go to chapter 992, there's this conversation between Big Mom and Marco where Big Mom is saying, "So sad, Marco, how Whitebeard's remnants, or retainers, have lost their way." And then Marco replies and says, "Do you think that Pops' voice is still binding us to his will? Everyone who is left is free." And so Marco and Raizo's words there are very similar, right? And we see Marco help out, and then by the end he steps aside to sort of bring in the new era, to let the stars enter the stage. And then we get the two wings by the end of the chapter, specifically referencing Luffy's dream. So it's that leader-subordinate theme that gets repeated again and again with Raizo and Odin, Killer and Kid, Marco and Whitebeard, and then Sanji, Zoro with Luffy. Another thing is that we actually get a countdown in this chapter. So Oda's kind of treating Onigashima like an asteroid because it's like 15 minutes till impact. And so what we know about Oda is that he loves giving Luffy these pretty fun spotlight stealing entrances. So I can only imagine that it's going to be something like Onigashima is going to crash down into the flower capital in 10 minutes, then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then just when we get to the 1, that's when Momonosuke activates his dragon clouds, stops the island, and then Luffy's going to show up riding giant Shenron Momonosuke. I just want to give a quick shout out to Killer, Kid, and Law because those three were on the rooftop. I mean, they were taking hits upstairs. And unlike Luffy and Zoro, who have now had a little bit of a break, they've had time to recoup, Killer, Kid, and Law haven't. And they're still going. I mean, they got off one fight and then immediately went to the next one. Granted, Kid, Killer, and Law were also the ones that did the less damage out of the 5 on the rooftop. But still, like, their durability, their endurance is commendable. This is why it's important to be as objective as possible and not just get caught up in the main character hype that Oda loves pushing so much. And then we find out that Killer has been able to sweep through Hawkins' voodoo dolls. Turns out he's actually linked a voodoo doll to Kid, so each time Killer hits Hawkins, he's actually damaging his captain instead. So Kid falls to the floor in front of Big Mom, which also means that him and Law have been able to hold their own against her for a while now. Like, they've been fighting a Yonko for a while. So that's also impressive. And so Law notices that something is wrong, and he would know because the inverse thing happened to him, where Hawkins was using the lives of his crew, of Beppo, Shachi, and Penguin, to force Law into giving up. And so Law should know exactly how this ability works, and so I'm wondering if Law can actually do something with his own ability and with his knowledge to maybe switch the doll with something else so that Kid can get free again. And I'm also curious if Kid or Killer can actually do something so that the effect doesn't work. Because Killer, like, he seems pretty confident after Hawkins tells him what's up. Killer's like, fa fa fa, which is the smiley. So he's not really laughing. That's just the effect of the devil fruit, the defective devil fruit. But then he also says, "I like your style," which is, you know, kind of like a confident thing to say. Like, you're a fun guy. Like, dude, he just told you, like, he's got your captain trapped. So I wonder if Kid and Killer actually have a counter to Hawkins' ability that we don't know of. Go to the light floor to find that King has set it on fire. I like how Queen is drawn carrying his machete over his shoulder.
It just looks very menacing. Meanwhile, King is roasting a gorilla on the side. Then we see Marco on the floor, which we knew this was going to happen because not only has he been fighting for a while now, but also because he used his flames on the Alliance to stop the ice-only bullet effect from spreading. And this also lets us know that Marco was the only thing standing between King and the live floor. Because we've gotten so many panels before this where only Queen is on the live floor, and King is nowhere to be seen. And then all of a sudden, Marco is down and the floor is on fire. So to me, it's pretty obvious that Marco was keeping King at bay. So I think what happened was this. Marco got tired. This allowed King to go down to the live floor, where Sanji was fighting Queen. And then Sanji tried fighting both King and Queen at the same time, and he just got overwhelmed. The point that Oda is trying to make here is pretty obvious, and that's that Sanji needs to put on the raid suit, because it increases his durability. He gets up pretty quick though, and he just tells Chopper and Miyagi to take Zoro away, to take him to safety if the medicine isn't working. And it's not that it's not working, it's just that it's taking longer because Zoro kind of shattered all of his bones. Sanji goes up against Queen again and actually kicks him in the face. And I can't tell if he has Diablo Jamba on or not. Now, if he doesn't have it on, that's impressive, because the kick is actually drawing blood. So what do you guys think? Does he have Diablo Jamba on or off? Regardless, I'll say this again, Sanji mainly needs the raid suit for durability purposes, not so much for speed and attack power purposes.
We get this small panel of King giving the order to find and kill Zoro, and when I first read that, I was like, okay, this is the first time ever that King has actually paid attention to Zoro. He's actually mentioning him, so what's going on here? And just coming into this arc, from the very early stages, I had my money on 4 fights. Luffy versus Kaido, Zoro versus King, Queen versus Sanji, and Usopp versus Orochi. So 3 out of 4, that ain't bad. One of the best things that could happen to Zoro is for Zoro to find a new challenge. And so one of the things that I noticed ever since the beginning of the time skip is that Oda was showing that when it comes to Zoro's fighting style, one of his areas of improvement is the fact that he has difficulty reaching targets, or he has difficulty fighting enemies that are high up in the air. In Punk Hazard, in order for him to cut the dragon, Usopp has to give him a trampoline in Dressrosa, or Lumbus has to throw him over to Pika, and then on the rooftop, Law has to switch him up so that he can cut Bottle Breath and then get a good shot at Kaido. So I'm really glad that Zoro's going to be getting a flying opponent, because what a great opportunity for growth, right? That he can cover that weakness, that shortcoming, and find a way around, being able to fight enemies in the air. He'll just become that much more of a beast once this fight is over.
Now, Pero, he's like standing on this candy tower of his own creation near the entrance of Onigashima. And we know he's near the entrance because in that small little panel where he says, Perorin, if you look above him, you'll see the teeth of the skull right above his head. And so right before Pero can send an arrow to Sanji, Nekomamushi comes in there, claws his face down, and makes him bite his own tongue. Meow. The cat strike is actually so strong that it sends Pero flying outside, crashing into a little mountain hill there. And that's kind of interesting because that same area is also where we last saw Wanda and Carrot. So maybe the girls will be getting the finishing blow on Perorin or something. Anyway, the samurai are carrying Cross, Mummy, Zoro to the same exit, and all of a sudden King shows up out of nowhere to block their path. He sets his hand on fire preparing a punch. Sanji's too far away so he can't make it, and then all of a sudden we hear, Oi, Kingu!
I feel like if I actually had to rank the commanders, the first Yonko commanders, just based off of what I've seen thus far, my ranking would probably go like this.
I'm not including Shiryu in this just because we haven't seen enough of him.
We haven't seen King's hybrid form, so this might change. It just depends on what his feats are against Zoro. And also, it depends on whether or not Marco actually has, a new hybrid form, aside from the one that we've already seen, where he has the wings and the bird claws. He's fine, by the way. He's well, I guess my job is done here, at least for a little bit. I guess I'll find something else to do. I like that part where he kind of pulls a Heisenberg from Breaking Bad, where he's like, oh, you got me. You got me. He's like, oh no. You can tell he's kind of being a little bit of a troll, And what really drives the point home is when he does the shady anime glasses thing. Usually this is a trope that shows that the character is plotting something. And he's done it before too. And look, Yamato's not going to be able to stall Kaido forever, so maybe he can go take a break and then fly up to the rooftop to help Yamato out. And then another thing, this is very important. As far as I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Marco and Luffy have met in Wano. So that has to happen. They have to cross paths at some point. But even beyond the whole Team Momotaro thing happening or not, just from a story standpoint, Marco knows something about Onigashima that we don't, okay? Because remember he said, oh, they call that island Onigashima now. So he knows something about the history of Onigashima that we don't. So I think he needs to reveal what that is. And so he still has a part to play in this story, in this arc.
And speaking of Marco knowing a lot of history, Marco tells King, I've heard tales from long, long ago about the race of people atop the Red Wall who could burst into flames. And here we have King the Wildfire. Now, would that mean... And so Marco's about to draw a conclusion from what he just said, but unfortunately Queen interrupts him and it gets cut off, and we don't find out what Marco was about to say.
So that's Marco's line, which happens to be the most informative line of the entire chapter. And it takes us back to when Big Mom asked King to join her crew because she's missing 3 races in Whole Cake Island. So we know that one of them is the Giants, the other one is unknown, and the final one is King's race. Now, if we look at the way that Kaido's crew is structured, we'll find that the higher up the ladder we go, the more uniqueness we find. So Who's Who was a former CP agent. Jack is a fishman that ate a devil fruit and therefore cannot drown. Queen has affiliations and connections with Vegapunk, Judge, and Caesar. And then when it comes to King, he's part of a race that was thought to be extinct. Now I'm showing you the dialogue here from Big Mom to King, and the manga actually phrases it a little bit differently. There she says that one of the races that she's looking for might have been lost in the mists of time. And then in this chapter, Marco says that King's race used to live at the top of the red line. And so I find that interesting because we know that Marijoa, which is at the top of the red line, is usually covered by mist. If we go back to the Reverie, the Gorosei actually ask Imu, what light would you like us to extinguish next? Notice the use of the word light. And then if we look at the picture of Nika, the sun god warrior, we'll see that his hair appears to be on fire. And then in this chapter, Marco says that King's race had the ability to create fire. So I think what happened is that King's race, in ancient times, King's race actually worshipped sun god Nika. And so obviously during the Void Century, there was a war, and the government won that war. Obviously, a pretty popular theory is that Nika is Joy Boy, or that Joy Boy was perhaps the reincarnation of Nika, just like Luffy could be the reincarnation of Joy Boy. Regardless, if King's race actually worshipped Sun God Nika / Joy Boy, then it would make perfect sense for why the government would want to exterminate King's race after the war. Because they were like the main race supporting Sun God Nika. And so the government exterminated King's race. King survived, obviously, and then to set an example to showcase their authority to the rest of the world, the government decided to establish their headquarters at the top of the red line where King's race once lived. I also think it's interesting that Who's Who mentioned that the person who told him about Sun God Nika in the first place was dressed up as a guard, and we know that King is dressed up as a guard for some reason. Now, it may not have been King who told Who's Who about it because the timelines don't really match, because Who's Who was imprisoned, I think, 12 years ago, and 20 years ago, King was already working under Kaido. So unless King infiltrated Marijoa while he was working under Kaido, then that makes sense. But mainly, I think it was a revolutionary who was dressed up as a guard who told Who's Who about Nika. But it's just something to think about.
Another thing that I find very interesting here is that the red line is supposed to be indestructible. That's why Laboon was getting scars all over his face, because he was ramming himself into the red line, trying to break it, trying to destroy it. And Crocus told him, like, it doesn't matter what you do. The wall's not going to budge. And so another thing I thought about was, like, what if King's race was responsible for creating the red line?
Like, what if they were producing like these volcanic eruptions with their heat? Or, they were doing something like molding lava to create this giant red mountain. I just thought about the idea that Nika, the name is based off of Greek mythology. So what if, like in Greek mythology, you know how Prometheus stole the fire from the gods to give it to man? What if Nika gave King's Race the ability to use fire? And maybe that's why King's Race and Nika became very close, just really, really tight friends. Joy Boy was like, just use this power and use it to reshape the earth or use it to build something. And then King's Race was like, yeah, we'll build a giant red mountain. Regardless, though, I do think that 3 things are true. The first is that there has to be some connection between King's Race and Sun God Nika. Like Nika's hair is on fire, for crying out loud. Number 2 is that I think the government didn't like the fact that there was a connection between King's Race and Nika / Joy Boy. So they eliminated King's Race. They wiped them out from history, at least tried to, because King is still alive. And then the other thing is that if King knows about the red line, right, then he probably knows why the red line is indestructible. He probably knows why the red line is so tough. And so I'm pretty sure that he's going to incorporate that indestructibility factor into his fight with Zoro. And then Zoro's going to have to find a way of learning how to cut something that is thought to be indestructible in his fight with King. I do want to mention the translation very briefly because I did notice a difference this time around. For one, the way that Chopper talks, we know that he talks like an old man. And I really like that gag, and I did notice that in the official translation this time around, that wasn't very noticeable. Like a lot of the dialogue that Chopper has in the official translation just sounds like normal dialogue, right? It doesn't have that old man flair to it. And then the other thing is the name of the attacks. So Marco's technique to block King's attack is called Undying or Immortal Thistle. A thistle is a very spiky cactus-like plant. And so the reason it's called that is because that's the way that the attack looks. It looks kind of spiky. And then Marco also has a technique named after a pineapple. So it kind of fits that same theme. And then King's attack in the official is called Imperial Flame. But then another translation called the attack Andon Divine Flame. And I thought that was such a much better fitting name for this attack for 2 reasons. Number 1, it uses the word divine, godly, right? Sun God Nika, he's using the fire, right? So if it's some kind of divine fire, again, it links King's Race to its history of there being a connection with Sun God Nika. And then the other reason is the word Andon. Now here's the thing, all right? The official Spanish translation also calls the attack Andon. Now what does that word actually mean? Well, as far as I read, the word Andon was used in the past to describe the traditional Japanese paper lantern. And so it's kind of cool because if you look at the way that King is lighting up his hand, it kind of looks like he's using it as a lantern.
The bandages kind of snap, then you just kind of hear dun 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 dun. Santoryu, Diablo Jumba, Rengoku, Muton, Shita.
Like I said in the beginning, the ending of this chapter is a very clear throwback to chapter 1020, where Robin says that Sanji is one of the wings that will carry Luffy on to become Pirate King. So of course, we know that Zoro is obviously the other wing. And I think that what this does as well is that it pretty much solidifies the fact that in Oda's mind, the monster trio is still a thing. It's unmovable, right? It's this thing that it's always going to be there, the monster trio. I know with Jinbei joining, there was a little bit of noise, in terms of the power dynamic of the crew. But this chapter solidifies that that monster trio is real, that it's Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, and that that's never going to change. The ending of this chapter also takes us back to volume 73 in the SBS, where Oda refers to Zoro and Sanji as Luffy's wings. And the reason why he mentions that is because a fan is listing all of the nicknames that Zoro and Sanji have for each other. And so if you look at the way this chapter ends, Zoro actually uses a nickname for Sanji as well. So Zoro calling Sanji by name is a moment that I think Oda is saving for a very special occasion. And I happen to think that it's going to happen when Sanji puts on the raid suit, because when Sanji puts on the raid suit, like, he gets this identity crisis. He doesn't like using it because people tell him, oh, that's Germa 66, that's Stealth Black. And Sanji always says, don't call me that. So it'd be kind of funny if, like, Zoro sees him in the suit and he says, Oi, Sanji. I love the closing statement of this chapter. It also reminded me a lot of a bit of dialogue that Kaido and Big Mom have at the end of chapter 1001, where the rooftop fight is about to take place, and Kaido says, I'm just going to read it to you. He says, "Wo-do-do-do-do. Once you're dead, we'll take everything you have. All your manpower and treasure will belong to us. Mama, you got some poneglyphs too, huh? I can't wait for that." And then Kaido says, "Whoever wins here gets that much closer to becoming Pirate King." Now, I could be reading way too much into this, but I gotta say it. In the official translation, Zoro's last line has the word conqueror, and then Sanji's last line, he says, catch a glimpse of Luffy becoming king of the pirates. So Sanji is talking about being able to catch a glimpse of the future, and Zoro is talking about being able to conquer something. So if we're talking Haki, if we're talking power-ups, this could be the fight where Zoro fully masters Conqueror's Haki, boosts it up, right? And just, uses it to his full potential. I mean, it's already been established that you can't train your King's Haki, but you can willingly and knowingly unleash it. That's what I see happening for Zoro. Because right now, Zoro's not even fully aware that he has it. So all of that's going to change in this fight. And then given what Sanji says, this is going to be the fight where he finally uses future sight observation Haki for the first time. And that is going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. The chapter was very good. Non-stop action, back to back. Just one fight right after the other. Zoro versus King is officially confirmed, and we're just getting that much closer to the climax of the arc. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of your support. Take care. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.